Buying a new vehicle is definitely a complicated process. Some people will say, I want a mid-size crossover or I want a pickup truck, and then they will shop for the options that are like that. And then some people like me might end up saying, I want a pickup truck like the Ram 1500 behind me, but in a rational world, in my world, it seems like something along the lines of another Dodge Durango might actually be a better fit. This is not my Durango. I've actually borrowed a Durango and a Ram 1500 for this episode because I'm currently vehicle shopping, and thanks to doing this for a living, I have access to be able to call up FCA, sorry, now Stellantis, and say, hey, can you send me a Ram 1500 that's approximately what I'm looking for and a Durango that's approximately what I'm looking for, so I can actually cross-shop them for a week. So let's go through that process right now. First up, why am I cross-shopping these two very different things? Well, in my reality, I need to tow. So I need to be able to tow over 7,000 pounds, about 9,000 pounds is ideal. Technically, you can do that in a Durango. You can tow 8,700 pounds with either of the three V8 options. But in addition to needing to be able to tow, I also live out in the country. I'm filming this in my driveway. It's a horseshoe-shaped driveway, and the reality is that a pickup truck is actually a little bit large, not just for this driveway, but also for the gravel roads that connect this driveway to the paved road. And that's a really critical thing when you need to get your trailer in and out. So why these two vehicles specifically? Well, to be perfectly honest, in terms of payload and towing ability, you can get a Ram, a Chevy, a Ford, or a GMC that are all within the same ballpark. You can get very similar payload and very similar towing capacity numbers in all four of those options. But when it comes right down to it, the Ram has a nicer interior. And I also think the exterior in this and the F-150 is simply more attractive than the one that we find in the Chevy Silverado at the moment. So that's the big reason that the Ram 1500 is on my shopping list. Now, I suspect I might get the Longhorn version with the 12-inch LCD infotainment system rather than the one that we're driving today. This one has the 8.4-inch system. Unfortunately, this is not Uconnect 5. This is actually Uconnect 4. This is the previous generation of the infotainment system, and even though the Durango is older, it recently got a refresh, and it actually has a bigger screen than this one, a little over 10 inches, and Uconnect 5. Uconnect 5 is much higher resolution than the system in this Ram 1500. But on the other hand, the rest of this interior looks and feels more modern. You can get it with real barnwood on the inside. There's a stitched leather dashboard even in this Laramie trim. And I have to say, I like this two-tone brown interior. The Durango is on the list entirely because of two things: what's under the hood and the tow rating. Again, up to 8,700 pounds, and the fact that there are three different V8 engines offered. My current Durango is the 5.7-liter Hemi. It is still rated at about 360 horsepower, so less horsepower than you get if it's in a Ram 1500, but about the same amount of torque. And the same 8-speed automatic transmission, interestingly enough. But back in 2018, you could not combine the 5.7-liter V8 engine with the rear suspension tweaks and the adaptive suspension system that bring towing capacity up to 8,700 pounds. So mine is technically at 7,200 pounds, even though I go over that limit, every now and then. So logically, getting into a Durango that would actually have the towing abilities that are more appropriate for my weights would make sense. And you can do that three different ways. There is this engine right here, which is not the one that I will be buying. This is the absolutely insane, over 700 horsepower, 6.2-liter supercharged V8. There's the one that I'm giving a little bit more serious consideration, a 6.4-liter Hemi, naturally aspirated, that produces 475 horsepower. That engine is a really, really great towing engine. We get a lot of horsepower and a lot of torque, about 75 pound-feet more torque than we find in the Ram 1500. That's obviously excluding the Ram TRX, which is absolutely not on the table either. I've always found it odd that the Ram 1500 does not get the 6.4-liter Hemi V8. Hopefully that's something that they will fix at some point later, but at this point in time, you can get the 3.6-liter V6, you can get the turbo diesel, you can get the 5.7-liter V8, or the 6.2-liter supercharged V8, but only in the TRX model. There's no street-focused version of that 6.2-liter supercharged engine. So these are very different vehicles in personality, because this is a pickup truck with a relatively softly sprung suspension. You can also get it with an adaptive air height suspension, which is certainly an option that I would select if I were to get one of these. And the Durango is more of a sporty vehicle, really. I suppose I should say it could be if you get any of the SRT flavors. Again, this one's the Hellcat flavored one. I would be looking at the 6.4-liter Hemi equipped one. It definitely has a more firmly sprung suspension than the Ram 1500, and also more firm than the regular 5.7 in the Durango. The regular 5.7-liter Durango is a pretty average family crossover, I'd say. The rear suspension can be a little bit light feeling if you don't have a ton of passengers in the back, but this vehicle is a little bit different. For 2021, the Durango got a little bit of a refresh. It got a restyled interior and just a bare few tweaks on the outside versus my red one that's lurking there in the background. Nothing changes back here really, except for strangely a slightly wider tail lamp right here, and then a little bit of a ducktail spoiler right there because this is the SRT model, also the big dual exhaust down there. Towing capacity is 8,700 pounds in the top end versions of the Durango for two reasons: the suspension and then the suspension mounting points in the vehicle. They're actually different in the SRT versions and in the 5.7 with the new Tow and Go package than the Durango that I have back there. The suspension design, the suspension mounting points, the brakes, and the tires are what give the top-end versions of the Durango their increased payload and towing ability. And something that I've talked about before is that this particular Ram 1500 actually has a lower payload rating than this Dodge Durango SRT Hellcat. The difference is not huge. This one is just under 1,200 pounds, and this one is just over 1,200 pounds. In addition to having a smaller payload rating, this Ram 1500 also has a smaller tow rating than that Dodge Durango. This one is decently under 8,000 pounds. It's important to remember that a wide variety of options affect your vehicle's payload rating. Basically, anything that changes the drivetrain, the axle ratios, the tires, the wheels, etc., that will all have an impact, and anything that adds weight to the vehicle. So selecting a bigger cab or a longer bed or the four-wheel drive system or options on the inside or the air ride suspension or the diesel or the V8 engine, all of that will affect your payload and your tow rating. There's obviously a relationship between payload and tow rating, but at the moment in the Ram 1500 you'll find the highest payload rating in the base V6 model, and you'll find the highest tow rating with the V8 under the hood. But it's important to keep in mind, if you're shopping for any pickup truck in North America right now, to actually take a look at the payload rating of the model that you are looking at. You'll find it on the driver's door. There's a little sticker there that will show you the actual payload rating of this exact vehicle right here. And then if you're looking at a Ram pickup truck, you can go over to their website, you can type in the VIN number, and it will give you a tow rating for this exact configuration. Rather unfortunately, if you're looking at an F-150 or a General Motors pickup truck or a Toyota or anything else out there, you will have to do a little bit of guesswork. You can look up on some tables, look up your wheelbase, your cab configuration, your GVWR, and it will give you an approximate range of tow rating. But I like the fact that Ram is giving us an actual exact number for your specific configuration. Unfortunately, at the moment, there is no Dodge website where you could do the same thing with the Durango. So I reached out to the folks at Dodge, and they said that all 5.7 liter models with tow and go, regardless of options, and all SRT models, regardless of options, are rated to tow 8,700 pounds. The only thing that will change is the payload rating. Because of the options that this particular vehicle has on it, the payload rating is a little bit below the max payload rating for the Durango, but actually, again, still higher than the Ram 1500. Obviously, the big reason to buy any pickup truck is what's going on back here, the pickup truck bed. Now, in the Ram 1500, we have a number of nice touches. We have these Ram boxes, probably an option that I would get because I love being able to carry around tools and other random things and being able to lock them away. I would probably also get this really cool barn door style rear tailgate. This is a really practical feature. It will open to the side. It will also open down like a regular tailgate, and it's nicely damped. But there are a few considerations. In this generation of the Ram 1500, you cannot get an 8-foot bed, and I think that's a real bummer. You can get a 6-foot bed, but that gets really long. In fact, if you were to get the longest version of this Ram 1500, which would be the one with that longest 6-foot bed available, it's going to be almost 4 feet longer than a Durango, and that is kind of a bummer to park in suburbia. It's also wider than a Durango, so even if you can find a parking stall long enough, it's going to be a little on the wide side. Now, thankfully, I live out here in the middle of nowhere, but the size of this also impacts the turning radius. Clearly, with a big V8 under the hood, the Durango is not going to win any awards for nimbleness, but the turning diameter is going to be at least 6 feet tighter than this Ram 1500. Then there are some additional realities to consider. The payload rating on this truck is under 1,200 pounds. And if I were to get all the options that I wanted in my truck and the air ride suspension, etc., payload capacity is probably still going to be under about 1,500 pounds any way you slice it in this generation of the Ram 1500. And remember that payload includes the weight of all passengers and all cargo, including the trailer that you have connected. So if you put 2 of me in there and then you put a 6,000 pound trailer on the back, you're not going to have a lot of payload left for anything in the cargo area. And because of my particular living situation, the fact of the matter is I can put more weight and more volume of stuff in a box trailer like this and tow it behind the Durango than I ever could in the bed of the Ram 1500. I also wouldn't be able to put my excavator in the bed of the Ram 1500, so obviously that's going to have to go on a trailer as well. For those heavier jobs, whether it's moving a tractor or moving a vehicle, I have a 24-foot tilt bed trailer. Again, you can put far more on here than you could in the bed of any pickup truck, and far more weight as well. This particular trailer is rated for 15,000 pounds, but of course this one has been legally derated so that way it can be driven with a regular old Class C license. That is another important thing to keep in mind. In a lot of states in the United States, about 10,000 pounds conventional is your limit with a regular Class C license. You have to move up to a Class A if you want to tow over 10,000 pounds in California and a large number of other states. It's about 26 states in total that have an effective limit at around 10,000 pounds conventional. Some states 15,000 pounds fifth wheel. California will allow you to tow a little bit more with the fifth wheel. But the key thing to know is that over 85% of Americans live in the 26 states with those restrictions. So chances are, if you're towing over 10,000 pounds, actual over 10,000 pounds, and you're doing it with a regular Class C, regardless of what you're towing, you may need to double check and make sure that you're doing it legally. I've had a lot of folks ask me about gear ratios, so let's take a deep dive into that right now. On the Ram 1500, we can get a 355 or 392 rear end. The SRT versions of the Durango have a 370 rear end. But there are two important things to remember. The tire sizes on these vehicles are different. So if we compensate for the difference in tire sizes, the Durango would be like a Ram 1500 with a 402 rear end. So it actually has more mechanical advantage. On top of that, it has a whole heap more torque. In a theoretical world where mechanical friction does not exist, absolutely not the world we live in, mind you, a Dodge Durango with a 6.4-liter V8 engine would be able to deliver 8,993 pound-feet of torque to the wheels, and this Ram 1500 with the 5.7-liter V8 would be delivering 7,568 pound-feet of torque. So if you actually had 8,700 pounds on the back of your Durango, if we had the 6.4-liter engine, it is going to feel significantly peppier than the Ram 1500 with the 5.7. And then of course, if you wanted to go absolutely crazy, which again I'm not, you could get the 6.2-liter Hemi with the supercharger, and that would deliver a whole lot more torque to the wheels. So much more torque to the wheels that this Dodge actually has a more robust version of the 8-speed automatic transmission than we find in that Ram 1500. Towing is, of course, not all about going, it's also about stopping. And we actually find bigger brakes in the Durango, 15-inch diameter front rotors versus 14.9 over there in the Ram, and they're thicker, so they have more thermal mass. This is also a two-piece setup here available, and we have 6-piston Brembo brakes up front, so the stopping ability on the Durango is actually greater than we find in the Ram 1500. It would also appear that heat rejection is going to be a little bit better in this setup. That's quite logical because this was designed to take on a track. I'm not quite sure who would take a 6,000-pound three-row SUV on a track, but if you ever wanted to, you could. Now in the back, the rear rotors are a little bit smaller in the Durango, 13.8 versus 14.8, but we have 4-piston Brembo brakes rather than the 1-piston setup in the Ram 1500. I've said it before, but it's worth repeating that the vehicle that ends up being right for me is not necessarily the right vehicle for you. For instance, the Dodge Durango isn't exactly my top pick in the three-row crossover segment, in sort of a nebulous world where I'm recommending a three-row crossover to someone. It just happens to fit my particular needs situation. Just like the Ram 1500 might be a better fit for you, especially if you live in suburbia and you don't have room for a ton of trailers, but say you want to take a ski boat out every weekend. Ram 1500 would be great. You'd also have the ability to have that bed in the back where you could store all sorts of stuff, and if you don't need 3 rows of passenger accommodation, the pickup truck might be the better option for you. If you plan on taking your truck mild off-roading or serious off-roading, clearly it's going to be better than most versions of the Dodge Durango. You can get the Durango with a 2-speed transfer case, and you can get it with skid plates, but it's not going to have the same kind of off-road ability that is theoretically baked into the Ram 1500 with the solid rear axle, the available airlift suspension, the higher ground clearance, the lockable center coupling, and available locking rear differential, etc. If you tow only a few times a year and you're interested in some of the modern trailer assistance systems, you will find more of them on the Ram 1500. We do have a trailer brake controller integrated now in the Durango, but the Ram 1500 has features like the trailer backup assistance, where you can just twiddle a knob and have it back the trailer up right on the screen for you. Now, personally, I find it easier to back the trailer up myself. I actually think that's faster if I just do it myself, but if that's something that you're interested in, you'll find it on this. You won't find it on the Dodge. Also, keep in mind that this seats 5, not 6. You will get 6 seats in the Durango if you choose the right model. And while the Durango has the newer infotainment system, we find a few more modern gadgets in the Ram 1500, like an available heads-up display and I think a nicer and more modern interior as well. After a week with these two options, we finally had to come to a decision, and ultimately I ended up ordering a Dodge Durango SRT, the one with the 6.4-liter V8 engine. And the big reason for that is that as much as I love the Ram 1500, and I really do, this is currently my favorite pickup truck in America, and if I were to buy a half-ton truck, I would buy a Ram. That's why it's in this video. But bottom line, the Durango is nearly 4 feet shorter. It is 42 inches shorter, so somewhere around here on the Ram. It's also a little bit narrower. And the turning diameter, I should say, is 7.7 feet smaller. In a world where this is a wide road, the Durango just ends up making more sense. Yes, it does not have a bed. Yes, there are times where I could use the Ram 1500's bed rather than take a trailer with me, but clearly there are times where I'm going to need a trailer because I can't put my excavator in the bed of the Ram 1500. It's just too heavy. It's actually too heavy even for a Ram 2500's bed. So obviously a trailer is going to be involved. And taking trailers down this road, backing them up, parking them, going around some of the tighter turns, it's just not easy in the Ram 1500. There are times where I had to make 3-point turns with my long flatbed trailer, and that is really not something that I want to do every single time I want to leave and then come back to my driveway. If your trailer reality is full of tight radius corners, especially when backing trailers up, then things like this chipper become really complicated because the distance between the hitch and the axle is really not very long at all. It is considerably shorter than my flatbed trailer or the box trailer that I showed you earlier. This is a really tricky thing to back up with anything that has a long wheelbase and a really big turning circle. In fact, every time that I need to move this around, I don't even use my Durango. I end up using a Grand Cherokee, my old Grand Cherokee that's a beater, because it simply turns tighter. It's so much easier to back this up with a vehicle that has a tight turning radius. And if you amplify that all the way up to something like a Ram 1500, 2500, or 3500, it really becomes a very frustrating endeavor. For instance, the parking spot for my flatbed trailer is right there between those redwood trees. That's a really tricky spot because the road, if I turn the camera here, as you can see, has a really sharp bend. The road's right there. And I have to back it up into that spot right there. That is at least a 3-point turn already with the Durango. And I just tried it with the Ram 1500. It ended up being more of a 4 or 5-point turn because the Ram just cannot turn tight enough. And then, of course, the 6.4-liter V8 in the Durango sounds fantastic, and it is faster and certainly more fun than the Ram 1500. So I ended up ordering one that looks almost exactly like the one right next to me. I got the same blue color, the front end looks the same without, of course, the Hell Kitty logo right there, and even the wheels are essentially the same as this particular model, just with a lot less power under the hood. Perhaps I will regret not selecting a pickup truck this time. I know that every time I have purchased a vehicle over the last 20 years, I kid you not, I have looked at a pickup truck. Depending on the year and the generation of trucks going on, I've looked at the Ram 1500, I've looked at the GMC Sierra, and of course I have looked at the Ram 1500, and every single time I've ended up getting something else just due to my particular realities. So this is as much a lesson as anything on the fact that the vehicle that's right for you may not be the vehicle that is right for other people. So if you have someone that's telling you this is the right vehicle for you, then you might want to really ask yourself, what do you need out of your next vehicle? Do you need to be able to tow? Do you not need to be able to tow? Do you want people carrying capacity, child seat carrying capacity, etc.? And that's one of the reasons that, generally speaking, I try and steer away from statements like, this is absolutely the best whatever, because it may not be the right one for you. Again, there are 3-row crossovers that I like better, I would say, generally speaking, than the Dodge Durango. This is clearly not the most efficient option. That would be something like the Highlander Hybrid. I also like the Ford Explorer ST. I think it's an awful lot of fun. It's a good value compared against some of the higher horsepower versions of the Durango, but they can't tow like this vehicle can. I love the way the Telluride looks. I think it's very practical, and there are some very child seat practical options in that segment as well, like the Volkswagen Atlas. Far more child seat practical than this Durango right here. But again, they don't fit my particular need. And I would say, if you don't want the horsepower, if you don't want the handling ability, and if you're not interested in the towing ability, there are going to be better 3-row crossovers out there that will be more efficient, less expensive to purchase, perhaps less expensive to own and operate as well. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. And of course, stay tuned because I will have a wrap-up video on my very red Durango that's parked that way in the driveway coming up very soon. And of course, an intro video when I finally get my hands on my SRT Durango. Be sure and find me over at facebook.com/AlexNauto so you can see what I'm driving this week, and head over to the merch store at AOAmerch.com so you can buy all the latest in AOA merch. I'll see all of you later.